Welcome to Lesson 7. In this lesson, we're going to go in depth, a little bit more depth, about the teacher shortage and try to understand how really serious it is. And unless something changes, it isn't going to be a lot better. When I was a kid, I used to listen to a show on the radio called The Great Gildersleeve, and he was always saying what a revolting development, and that's what we're in here. In the past lessons, we see the serious deficiencies in student performance and on assessment exams and competency skills. The obvious resolution to these problems is to hire more and better teachers. This brings us to the topic of this lesson. Currently, there is a sizable shortage of teachers, and it is going to get worse. Unless dramatic changes are made, it will keep getting worse, and we must take strong action to stop it.
Again, the book had this graph created probably in 2015, 2016, because it was in editing for many months, and this is Darling Hammond, one of the three authors up there. She is a really important professor at Stanford University. And when they produced that graph that I have in my book, we were going to be 112,000 teachers short a year, about a third of our need. We would be short of college graduates that majored in education. That's now increased to 2/3. We're going to be 200,000 short out of a need of about 300,000 of getting qualified teachers. In a minute, I'm going to tell you, and you probably know this, there's really only one thing that matters, and that's the teachers. To have them positioned right, paid right, and so forth. So this is very disconcerting. Is this why our competency ratings have gone from 19 to 25? They did another one I didn't mention in 12, 14, and it was 20%. So in just a few years, we've gone from 20% incompetent to 25%. And maybe because we can't get the teachers to teach them.
In my talk, I talked about a supply-demand curve, and as I listened to myself say those words, I think there is a bit of confusion. One of the confusing points is that there are several releases of this chart, and as time goes by and data gets better, they change it, and it keeps getting updated. The chart that I had by the same authors was an earlier version, and it showed a leveling off of a deficiency of about 112,000 teachers a year, supply versus demand. Now, the teachers we're talking about are traditionally trained four-year college graduates who have been trained in their subject matter and how to teach. So unless something changes, we're going to be missing 63% of our needed teachers. What is this graph telling us? It says there is a current annual demand of approximately 300,000 teachers. That is, teachers that have been trained in the School of Education and probably have a four-year degree. And this demand number is growing slightly every year to around 310,000 in 2025. The growth comes about because of a move to smaller class sizes and because there is a slight increase in the students that need to be taught. The graph says that the supply for teachers, the annual output of these schools, is getting smaller every year. Fewer and fewer students are selecting education as a major, and more existing teachers are leaving the profession. As a result, we see a shortage of approximately 200,000 a year by the year 2025. What compounds this problem is over the years, only about half of the graduates of schools of education have actually gone into teaching. They end up taking other jobs. Here's more background information on the fact that students are just losing interest in going into classrooms. Since 2010, enrollment in teacher preparations programs nationwide has declined by more than 1/3, according to a new analysis from the Center for American Progress. meaning that approximately 340,000 fewer students are enrolled in teacher preparation programs today. Along with Oklahoma, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Illinois, Idaho, Indiana, New Mexico, and Rhode Island, all notched enrollment declines of 50%. So each one of these states, the enrollments have gone down by 50%. And in 9 states, California, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, and so forth, the enrollment dropped by more than 10,000 students. There are so many factors to be considered in fixing this problem. It is going to be very difficult to fix. I would estimate that it will take 10 years to bring things into balance, and that's only after we take some really drastic measures, such as improving teacher pay. Bringing things into balance will require monumental reforms in education, changes in schools of education, law changes, tax reforms, and significant salary increases. Here is a video that presents 5 reasons that explain why we have a problem.
In our last video, we talked about where the teacher shortage is the worst. Today, let's talk about the reasons why the shortage exists. It's not because there are more students than in the past. Although technically student enrollment has increased a little bit, and it's not because there's a sudden demand for more teachers. The total number of teachers in the United States has remained pretty steady. So, what's going on? There are 5 main reasons for the teacher shortage. First, teacher preparation programs simply aren't producing as many new teachers. Nationally, the number of new educators graduating from teacher prep programs has fallen by almost 30%. This tightening of the new teacher pipeline is primarily driven by decreasing interest and enrollment in traditional teacher prep programs, and alternative programs haven't been able to make up the difference. Quite simply, teaching isn't exactly an attractive career choice for young people anymore, and that's a bad sign for the future teacher pipeline. It's tough to hire new teachers when there just aren't as many to go around. Second, high teacher turnover creates an ongoing problem. Educators leave for higher paying professions, or districts with better pay, or to escape unsupportive school cultures. And every time a teacher leaves their position, the school district has to find candidates to fill that opening. And there just aren't enough candidates to meet the rising need. It's like trying to fill a big leaky bucket with a low-pressure garden hose in the desert. Another big reason for the teacher shortage has to do with salary and benefits. Teachers in the United States earn just 60% of what other professionals with similar education levels make. It's not just the salaries either. Health insurance costs are rising for everybody, including teachers. And pension costs are shifting more and more to the individual teachers, with many educators being required to contribute more money to their pension programs or retirement funds. You might say, well, tough luck. Everyone's paying more these days. But teachers aren't seeing big salary increases to make up the difference. In fact, from 2006 to 2016, the average teacher salary fell by 3% after taking inflation into account. It's tough to recruit and retain teachers when you can't offer competitive wages and benefits. So it makes sense that states with less funding for schools and the lowest teacher salaries tend to have the more severe shortages. Remember the teacher protests in what happened in Arizona, West Virginia, and Oklahoma? Reason number 4, challenging work environments. Teachers don't just leave because of the salary. They often leave because of the working conditions. There's pressure from parents, frustration from ever-changing mandates on what to teach and how to teach it, and long hours spent working on paperwork, lesson plans, and assignments well after the school day is over. As a teacher, all of this is worth it when you finally see a concept click for a student. But when you add another stressor into the mix, like being low on money, having to pay for classroom supplies out of pocket, and a lack of professional development or an unsupportive school culture, well, that can be the straw that breaks the teacher's back. This isn't just a retention problem either. It's tough to convince people to become teachers when they're hearing about the troubles of teaching to the test or dealing with difficult home life situations. And finally, the fifth reason for the teacher shortage: a lack of fully qualified applicants. This one seems pretty obvious. There's a shortage after all. What I mean by this is even if a district has applicants for a position, they might not have experience in that subject. Or it could be that they don't have a teaching license or degree at all. This happens more than you think. It's becoming more and more common that positions are filled with teachers with provisional, temporary, or emergency certifications. This happens across teaching subjects, even in elementary or general education, and it's particularly prevalent in high poverty schools, where it can often be even more helpful to have the proper training and relevant education to support creative problem solving and foster a positive learning experience for students. And even for schools with more resources, this can be a serious challenge when trying to fill more specialized positions. It's not generally good practice to have a teacher trying to learn the same subject matter as their students. If you're trying to hire someone to teach calculus in one of your high schools, but none of your candidates have any background in mathematics, you're going to have a hard time. And so will your students. For that matter, whoever you hire will have a hard time too, trying to learn about differentials the night before they're supposed to teach it to a class of 25 students. But if you have to hire someone and no one is qualified, what are you supposed to do? In several states, the answer is to take what you can get. Hire the candidate who appears to have the most potential and apply for an emergency certificate. That way, this position can be filled now, and hopefully you'll have a fully certified teacher in the future. So there you have it, the top 5 reasons for the teacher shortage. In our next video, we'll talk about a few ways that schools can get creative and fill positions.
There is one thing she didn't talk about, and that is the changing role of women in the workforce. Teaching has traditionally been a woman's profession, probably because there are fewer opportunities in the job market these past years for women. This has all changed. New recognition. Women can do anything a man can do, so there is much more competition for their talents. However, I would suspect that teaching has an inherent appeal to women, but it is not strong enough to overcome the disparity in pay that they can earn in other professions. There is one more seldom discussed issues or reasons for unhappy teachers. This is one of my pet peeves. This is a lot of the content of my book. It's about disruptive students. The 5 reasons discussed in the video are usually considered to be the main factors, but my research and insights says there is one more major consideration, and that is disruptive, disrespectful, and downright mean students. If you looked at lesson 4, you will exactly see what I am talking about. Why is this elephant in the room never mentioned? Why do we not hear schools complaining about these kids? Here's the reason. A working teacher, somebody teaching right now, considers it their job to manage their classrooms. To not do so is looked upon a failure of the teacher. And what I talk about in my book, there are some kids that are just not manageable. They are so far off the scale that hardly anybody can manage them. A sure path to teacher administrator job change, in other words, for them to get fired, is to blame their problems on their students or their parents. By the time you go through most of my lessons, there is ample evidence that some students and some parents are a major obstruction to the education process, an obstruction that must be removed before there is any movement back to effective education. What can we do to solve this problem? Well, one of the obstructions to recruiting students in education is repayment of their school debt. So we're now talking about teachers. Let's produce teachers more rapidly, say in 1 or 2 years. maybe even 3 months. This may not be particularly relevant for higher grades, say 7th grade and on, but it will work for pre-K to 6th grade. Let's look to associate degrees for these early general content classes. These degrees are awarded by many vocational schools, schools that are inherently less expensive and therefore requiring less debt. Teachers with associate degrees should have the option of attending night school to advance to the bachelor's degree. There's another way to correct the shortage. In 1993, the state of Massachusetts made major changes in their system. The state of Maryland, in March of 2020, just enacted a new program as well. Both programs have made dramatic increases in teacher pay, raising compensation to make it compatible with other jobs that require a 4-year degree. In my opinion, this alone will not be enough. The problem of poor discipline and disruptive children must be resolved. No well-paid professional will tolerate classroom questions about their sex life, telling them to get effed, and other similar vulgar and profane comments. This ends Lesson 7.